Okay, we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. And thank you so much, Glenn, for joining today. We have the Glenn. um, I'm so excited. I was telling Glenn before we went live that this is like a starstruck moment for me, seeing somebody who I've known from other works in the past come on. And I cannot wait to introduce you guys to Glenn and his work, the Chronicles of Chaos series. Glenn, for those who don't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what kind of fantasy you write?
Well, I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to hear that you've heard of me. That's fantastic. I did not expect that coming on, but just to talk a little bit about what I've done, I think you might have heard of some of the computer game design work that I did. I did that for decades. Some of the games I worked on, I have here, like Wheel of Time, which is based on the Robert Jordan series of books, and Deathgate Cycle, based on the Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman books. And those were instrumental in me sort of figuring out my own storytelling, because I took those worlds and told my own stories inside of them, and that working with the masters, that there's nothing better than that. And so while I was working on Wheel of Time, I came up with a concept for my own world. Actually, I did so because I had to pitch the Wheel of Time to a publisher, and they didn't want the license. They didn't want Wheel of Time. They just wanted the
Oh,
game. And so the night before, they said, come up with another premise. And so I said, okay. And so the night before I did, we ended up going with another publisher, and they wanted Wheel of Time. And so that was good because, I mean, it was a great license. But that premise stuck with me. And when I was done with with that game, I came back to it and I said, is there another game here that maybe I could come up with? And I realized, no, it wanted to be a novel. 20
mm,
years later, I finished writing that novel because
wow.
I was working on a lot of games in that time. And it took me a long time to focus and get that out. And it changed a lot. I did a lot of learning in that time. And ever since I published that, I've now published one book a year since then. And I have 3 out. And hopefully this year I'll come out with the 4th, which will be the finale to the Chronicles of Chaos. And just if
Wow.
people are interested, I can show. This is it's not the first book I published, but it is the first in the series. It's a prequel, and at this point, it is the book I suggest entering the series on. This is that book. This is the one that I dreamed of, decades ago. The Child of Chaos, and this one just came out this year, or just last year, The House of
Yes.
Prophecy, which I don't know. I'm biased, but I kind of think it's one of my best. I think I'm getting a little bit better every book I make. And then the finale, which will be out this year, is the Realm of Gods,
Oh,
and
wow.
it's awesome in that it's very daunting for me. But it explains like everything, explains the whole world and the gods and why it all came together the way it did, and the climax is just crazy. So I'm having fun writing that one right now.
Wow. So much to take, you said 20 years to get the book out.
20
That's so
years.
encouraging because we've had so many new authors tuning in this year who are picking up books for the first time and are like, it's taken me so long to write the first book. So, in light of that, books 2 and 3 have been a lot faster for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I kind of figured out how I write a book, which is, of course, not like anyone else is going to write a book. But
Mhm.
I'll tell you, one of the things that people need to understand, especially new writers, is that it's okay to suck. It's okay
Yeah.
for your material to be horrible. It's gonna be. Your first draft likely is gonna suck, and that's okay. In fact, I tell my design students, I teach a design class at UC Berkeley in the summers, and I tell them, you can't evolve your design until there's something there. So
Mm.
editing is a huge process in self-editing is a huge process. And as Neil Gaiman says, your first draft is, your idea. Your
Mm.
second draft is what the first draft should have been if you realized what you were writing. And then third draft and fourth draft. So yeah, just get it out there. And I have sort of tuned my own experience. I mean, part of it is I know the world, I know the characters, and I know kind of where I'm going. And so that helps me a lot. That first 20 years,
Mhm.
me establishing everything, and
Mm.
then and also blowing up the world at the end. I thought it was a one shot, I thought I was not going to be doing any sequels or anything. It's one of the reasons I made it a prequel. I'm like, I blew up
Yeah.
the world. I really want to do some more in that world, so I made a prequel to it. And then I had to figure out, where do you go from there? And that's where House of
Mm.
Prophecy comes in. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of amazing where things went. Even though I sort of lost what I thought was one of my major draws, which is what I blew up, but I won't give spoilers about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, were you a big reader before you got into the gaming and got involved with like Robert Jordan, or not as much?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was in high school and college, you did not find me without a book in my hand. And when I was at Legend, at first we were an adventure game company, but we had the opportunity to chase after a few licenses. The first one that we got was Frederick Cole's Gateway. And
Mm.
after that, that actually did really well. And so I think, the studio head, so does anybody have any ideas about licenses we should chase? And I put my hand up. I wanted to go after Piers Anthony Xanth, and I wanted to go after Deathgate from
Mm-hmm.
Margaret Weiss and
Mm-hmm.
Tracy Hickman. And we ended up getting both of those, along with a few others. And then after I was done with Deathgate, which was my first solo game that I designed, they tried to give me a bunch of others that I hated. And I said, you know what? And because we were associated with Random House at that point, they were actually a
Right.
minority shareholder in Legend. And I looked at all of the ones they were proposing. I said, I don't like any of these guys. You know who I do like is Robert Jordan, because I
Yeah.
had just read like the first couple of books and I was hooked. And so they didn't have Robert Jordan in Random House. Obviously, he was with Tor at the time. And so they
Mm.
said, okay, we'll use this as the opportunity to get our foot in the door and maybe try to get Robert Jordan over to Random House. Of course, that never happened. I mean, his wife was an editor at Tor. There's no way he was going to leave. But I didn't care what they thought. I was, as long as they're backing me, I was all in. So I got to do Wheel of Time, and that was amazing for me.
Wow. Wow. And just to work with the legends. And I mean, you've had some legendary endorsements on your book too now. You've got Piers Anthony actually left a great endorsement of your series.
Yeah, so that's an interesting story. So Piers Anthony, I mean, he's up there in age, and he knows it. I mean, he is a self-proclaimed crotchety old man. He doesn't. But the thing is, he's a voracious reader, and
Mm.
so it's hard for him not to read.
Mm.
So I got in touch with him because we did the Xanth game. I didn't do the Xanth game. I actually chased after the license, but I didn't get to do it. And it's kind of
Mm.
good because my writing doesn't lend itself to puns. And
Mhm.
anyone dealing with Xanth has to be really comfortable with puns. So I contacted him because we had that connection and heard back basically nothing about my book, but mostly about all the problems he had with the game that we made. And I was like,
Oh no.
and he was like, you guys didn't listen to me. I was telling you all these things you should have done with the game. I'm like, that wasn't me. I was not there. I was not working on your project. And I told him that. I said, I'm sure it would have been much better had you been more involved, without, throwing the actual designer under the bus.
Mhm.
But then he said, well, okay, I guess I'll, if I read your book, and I'm not promising I will, but if I do, you're not going to like what I have to say, because nobody does. I hate everything. So I'm like, it's okay. Just, I'll try for it. And he could have destroyed me. He could have
Mhm.
just, because this was before I even published my first book. And so I have no idea what he's going to say. And he reads it in one night. And he
Oh
tells me he
wow.
couldn't put it down. And the next day he comes back with a review that has so many quotes in it that I could have put on the front of my book. I couldn't believe it. So it was one of those moments, that just like I just wanted to fall down. It's like this is incredible. This could, help make my career. This guy,
Mhm.
this Piers Anthony, my childhood fantasy hero, is telling
Mhm.
me I'm an author to watch out for, and
Mm.
that was just fantastic.
That's amazing. That's a that's incredible. I was telling my husband, who's not a big reader, about Piers Anthony and his works earlier tonight, and really, I feel like authors like him and Terry Brooks helped lay the foundation for the fantasy that I've loved my whole life, and are part of the reason I wanted to write fantasy. And of course, from in my case, it took a female author to make me see, oh wow, women can write fantasy that is not romance too. But just having that foundation there is what makes your mind spin when you're young. Did you have a favorite fantasy author growing up?
Well, definitely Piers Anthony early on. I think
Mhm.
he was some of the first, but then like David Eddings and
Mhm.
Terry
Mhm.
Brooks and even like Orson Scott Card and I mean, there's so many. Just look at my shelf over here. Tad Williams,
Mhm.
definitely. So yeah, I just again. Oh, and Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. I think I read everything they produced at the time because
Mhm.
it was just it just drew me in. That's why I was such a big fan of the Dragonland stuff, and then of everything else, the Death Gate Cycle, and they made a bunch of series.
Mhm.
So working with these people that I had only read their works, and again we talked about this, they're real people,
Yeah.
and Margaret, when Margaret Weiss told me, if it's easier for you to call me and ask me something about my series, then look it up, call me. I'm like, oh
Mhm.
my god, this is this is my hero author telling me to just give her a call. That that was a nice moment too.
Yes. And I totally feel that starting just getting into editing and talking to authors and like you said, realizing that we authors are real people, and they have been around a whole lot longer and have worlds more experience than I do, and you are ahead of where I am. But as you go further along, you realize they're just more and more and more like you with vivid imaginations and dreams, and it's
I
amazing.
I'm not that much ahead. I've only been doing this for like about 3 years now, which to
Mhm.
me doesn't seem that very long. To others, it's like people who are producing a novel a month. I mean, that's just like a lifetime of production. But that's not me. I can't do that. I'm one book a year. I mean, it takes me that long to figure out what the book is about.
Mhm.
Those ideas need to marinate for me.
Yeah.
I can't rush that process. I kind of wish I could, but I just can't.
So what brought you the indie route as opposed to going like you said you had worked with Random House, so I'm sure you probably knew some people maybe you could have sent the book off to.
I don't think I had contacts at that current Random House because that was a long time ago. And the people
Mm.
that we knew were no longer there.
Mm.
So I didn't really have an easy in to a publisher. I did do some agent submissions for my first manuscript, and I got some interest, but nobody. By the time that I got somebody who was kind of interested in maybe moving forward, I had already had an offer from a small press to publish my book. And I
Mhm.
figured, hey, somebody wants to publish my book. That's kind of cool. I didn't really understand um, the universe of small presses and what that
Mhm.
meant,
Mhm.
because anybody can be a small press.
Mhm.
And really, what are they bringing to the table? And I certainly don't want to slag off small presses because they're all different. And some of
Mhm.
them are, I'm sure, they bring a lot to the table. But my experience was it brought mostly delays
Mm.
and not a lot of help
Mm.
to the process. So I was there under contract with a small press for about a year
Mm.
while they were doing stuff. I don't really know what they were doing. And in that time, I learned a lot about self-publishing, and I realized that not only were they not going to be able to do the things that I thought I should be doing, but I could do them better,
Mm.
in the promotion and even the finding an editor that I like to work with. They actually gave me an editor, and they provided me the end result, and that editor ended up introducing more errors than they took out.
Mm.
In fact, not just errors, but categories of errors. I had to give them a list of all the things that they had made wrong about my manuscript, and so that's when
Mhm.
I kind of knew I'm in the wrong place for me.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I ended up, because of COVID, and because they decided not to do um, printed versions of the books. They were only going because that's the way they thought that's where the money
Oh
was.
yeah.
And they made it so that if you wanted printed books, you'd have to go through them at an exorbitantly high price to get author copies. And at that point, they're kind of defining themselves as a vanity press. And
Mhm.
so I said, that's not for me. You changed the terms of my contract. I'll be seeing you. And
Mhm.
I went on my own way, and I've been doing that ever since. Will I eventually go the traditional route? It's possible. I mean, I have way more credibility now than I did back then when I was starting. But I'm happy staying in my series now. And, I don't want to go into any details, but there's interest in this series for other media.
Mhm.
And so I am really happy to own all my own rights.
Right. Well, and you have the experience to go behind it. I was on a conference earlier this week where I cautioned the newer writers in the group that if you don't have the experience to navigate contracts, bringing in an attorney or somebody to help with that, or an agent, would be really helpful. But if you have that experience where you can read and understand what the terms are, that's fantastic.
I would probably still get an agent. If I'm at the point where I'm ready to sign a contract, if someone's optioning my stuff, I'm going to have someone look that over. I'm not going to trust myself. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an agent. So I want that experience on my side too. But I
Mhm.
also will say one thing that people should know for new authors. Every new author feels this way. I was at the Reader's Favorite Awards not that long ago, and I met somebody who was, he had these big ideas about how he wanted to make a game and books based on the game and whole media empire. And I
Mhm.
said, but he didn't want to tell me about it. I said, here I am, a guy who actually has experience doing that stuff, willing to listen to you and give you
Mhm.
my advice, and you don't want to do that because you think I might steal it. Let me tell you, everybody feels that way, meaning everybody feels like they've got the best ideas. And it's
Mhm.
only the really inexperienced people that won't talk about it. If you find someone willing to listen to what you have to say, tell them. Because
Mhm.
I found this out back when I was doing computer games. Throw everything against the wall to anyone who will listen, and somebody might finance you. I
Mhm.
went to publisher after publisher explaining exactly what our idea was and exactly why it was the next best thing. And who knows, maybe they could have stolen it from us, but they're not in the business of stealing things. Anyone who can actually take advantage of that stuff won't do it because they don't want
Mhm.
to put themselves in a legal problem for having done it. So
Mhm.
I just wanted to say, lots of new authors think, don't tell anybody what my secret sauce is because they'll steal it. No, they won't.
Yeah, and I've seen genuine pirating too, and that's usually after the book's written. And at that
Yeah.
point, you should already have your copyright. You should already have that stuff, and that's a totally different thing. If you're watching live on YouTube, please feel free to drop questions for Glen, and I'll pull them up on the screen. If you're watching on Twitter, I will get them off my phone. We've had a couple interesting questions that were pre-submitted, so I'll answer those, or not answer them. Glen will answer them. I'll ask them in a second. But I just think it's fascinating that, the doors are still open. Like you said, you've got all the rights, you've got
Hmm.
your books, and the doors are still open. One of the questions that we had pre submitted was about the genre, because last week or the week before, an author came on and she said that she was pitching, and the agent read her book and was like, "You're a fantastic writer, your writing style's great, but epic fantasy is dead." And so she decided to go indie, and she has no regrets going indie at all. And as a epic fantasy writer myself, and having had many others on the channel, I'm curious as to whether you think it's fallen into a solely indie genre, or is it truly dead and traditional?
Well, so I don't have numbers. I mean, I can only tell you sort of what my own impression is.
Hmm.
Um, I will say this. Fantasy is one of the few evergreen genres. So there will always be demand for fantasy. And we see sort of the demand be kind of a roller coaster. It's always at a certain level, but depending on like what's out there in terms of like movies and TV shows, those things drive demand as well. Um,
Mm.
so so if you're gonna be in a genre, you'll always have interest if you're writing fantasy.
Mm.
Specifically about epic fantasy, I don't know. I mean, I am a sort of YA epic fantasy writer,
Mm.
um, and I found myself there more because that's who my protagonist was that age. My style is fairly fast paced. I don't let you breathe very much in one of my books, and that's what YA usually is, and the themes tend to run in that sort of age group. But I didn't realize it until someone told me. And in fact,
Mm.
Child of Chaos is almost a little bit too dark. I thought for YA, and then someone told me, no, 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 YA is pretty dark. Don't worry. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'm YA. But I've embraced that now with pretty much every book that I've written. It's definitely in the YA. That said, I think 80% of the people who read my books are adults
Mm-hmm.
because they enjoy YA. So it's not just intended for YA. So epic fantasy, is it dead and traditional? I don't know. I don't think so. But I don't have numbers, so I don't. Maybe that guy is privy to information I don't have. But I'll bet you anything, if it is on a downward trough, it'll be up again, because fantasy always is.
Absolutely. Do you have any advice for writers who would like to submit their books to game designers?
I don't see a lot of upside in doing that. Basically, the way I approached it was, I, as a game designer, was a fan of something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew, my mind was already working, how can I translate that story into gameplay? And in some cases, the authors would never have made those choices, because like in Deathgate, I took 7 books and combined them into one game. And so I made changes. I made big changes. I consolidated characters. I changed environments. And I even changed how the story ended. And I had a lot of hubris for being a young designer making games based on other people's world. I was like, yeah, I know better than the author does about how this should play. But they did pretty well. People liked how they were in the spirit of the material. But if you have a book and it doesn't have a huge following out there, making that into a game is sort of going to have to be an indie effort, because I can't imagine what your pitch would be to go to like EA or a big publisher and say, hey, I've got a book nobody's read. You want to make a game out of it? Because they have game designers who have their own ideas about what they should be doing. I mean, I'm kind of in that same situation, though, with my books, because I don't have a huge monster following. How am I going to get those into the right hands? Well, it's all about who you know. It's partially about what you've written, but it's also a lot about who you know, and it's about is the material really good? Can it be earmarked for an audience that they want? And so is it following trends? That's how you can do that. And again, fantasy's evergreen, and YA fantasy is pretty evergreen too.
Great advice. We had somebody come on who's a producer during the Blitz and said something very similar about all the changes that were going to happen to your book if you went the movie route. And so it's interesting to hear, really thinking, do you want this adapted into something else?
It depends on how much of an egomaniac you are. And again, making games, that busted that right out of me. There are a lot of game designers, who are auteurs and have that ego. But the more you do it, the more you realize that your baby, your vision, is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller based on budget and time and people and talent and all of that. It's more of a collaboration, and so you learn to kill your babies. You learn to kill the features you really thought were awesome. And the same is true of, I think, taking your property into, yes, you have to protect it. No one else is going to protect your story like you are, or your characters. But you have to understand that there are other really creative people who are going to be involved in the process. And chances are they're going to bring something that's good to it. And even if they don't, tell you what, they're going to make something out of it, and they're going to put it on screen, and you're going to sell a lot of books.
That's right.
There's always that.
Absolutely.
Shipping is better than not shipping. That's really what it comes down to.
So you've got another book coming out this year, and congratulations on your Golden Award
Yes.
with Reader Favorite. That's awesome.
I can show you a couple. I have both of them here just in case. So these are the ones I have physical stuff for. So this is the Dante Rossetti Award for YA Fantasy, and this is the Reader Favorite. And getting 2 gold Reader Favorite, that was, I mean, I don't know how to say this in such a way that doesn't make me look, like I'm putting my own horn. But when I was there, I actually went to the Reader's Favorite Awards because I thought, how often am I going to have 2 gold medals to accept? Never. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I have to go. And I was one of the, I don't even remember if there was anybody else who got to collect 2 gold. So that was really a moment for me. That was really awesome. I had a lot of fun there. And yeah, 2 gold. And I'm hoping for a 3rd. I entered it into my category, and you never know. They seem to like my stuff, so I'm hoping.
For authors who are wondering, how do they find awards to put their books into consideration for? That's a great question.
Yeah, so there is a site, I can't remember the name of it, Writers Beware maybe, and they have a list of all the competitions out there, and they rate them. So there are different color codes based on red, don't do it. Yellow, you need to know these things before you do it. And green, and it's all about how much money you're paying, how much exposure you'll actually get, the value for that, and the prizes if there are any. And the truth is that I did some shotgun shooting initially, just seeing who would be interested. I had no idea if I was going to win any awards, and then I sort of found the ones that I won. I mean, when I won the reader's favorite for gold, again, it was kind of like when I got the Piers Anthony thing. It was like I just fell over. I couldn't believe that I got a gold for my first book out of the gate. But then I found the ones that sort of, they seem to appreciate my stuff. And so I'm, continuing to go with those because I might actually win. There were a few that I just didn't even place. And that happens. And that, probably more often than not. So I went with, so I have like the independent author awards. That's this big thing here. And
wow,
outstanding fiction. This is one for fantasy, and actually Child of Chaos won that award for the best debut over 80,000 words. Also, this one won for the American Fiction Award. So yeah, basically if you can afford it, it's worth trying, because there's nothing aside from getting really good quotes from established authors. There's nothing that you can look at a cover and say, maybe I don't want to see that book, other than those stickers, because those stickers means it's been vetted. You might like this book because other people have liked this book. So I think it's great. I think it's a great marketing tool. I recommend winning some awards.
And is that the same recommendation for people who only plan on releasing ebook, or is it pretty much only good for print?
No, so even for the ebook, you can change your cover in your Amazon page to have that medal on it. If you look at mine, I have those medals on the ebooks. I would say though that those stickers are really great for signings. You and I were talking. I've been doing a bunch of Barnes and Noble signings recently, and having those stickers just attracts a lot of attention. It was really when I get people into my spiel, I would say 50% of the people who end up at the end buy the book. And I think a large part of that is because they're convinced that they will enjoy this book because it's award-winning.
Yes. And I'm going to try to bring Glen back to do a special indie author behind the scenes video for us about signings and things to do and not do, both to set them up and at them. So keep watching for that, because I'll try to get that set up with Glen for another day. But you said that you had, besides the book this year, do you have any events this year? You've mentioned your signings.
Yeah, actually, if you go to mysterium.blog, I have my calendar there. And actually, I'll just go there right now and tell you where I'm going to be. So I am pretty much in the San Francisco Bay Area. So you probably won't find me outside of that, because we're not flying anywhere. All right, so my next one is going to be at Half Price Books. And that's Saturday, January 28th, so just in a couple of weeks.
Wow.
That's in Concord. And I'll say the one thing that's really interesting about Half Price Books for writers who are out there, they don't take a cut. Everything you sell, you keep, which is kind of amazing. I don't really understand the business model, but I think it's just because they're trying to make connections in the community. They want authors to come. So if you haven't thought about it, talk to your local Half Price Books, see if you can set up an event there. After that is the Saturday, February 11th at the Walnut Creek Barnes & Noble. They're new. They just built that one. This was after Waterstones acquired Barnes & Noble. And so it has a more Waterstones feel. They're the UK book chain. And then on Saturday, February 18th, I'm at the Concord Barnes & Noble in the veranda. And then Saturday, March 4th, I'm at the Antioch Barnes & Noble. And I will say that once you're in the door and they know you, they start talking to each other, all the managers of these stores. And once they hear, like, one of the managers came up during our signing and said, I just talked to all the other managers, and what you're doing right now is exactly what they said was going to happen, which is I can't get in there because you got so many people talking to you all the time. And that's one of the keys, is you have to be engaging. You can't sit there and wait for them, because people will not come up to you. They'll see you there and they won't care. You know, they'll move on to get their Starbucks coffee, or, you know, get their shopping done. But if you have one of these, you can get them to talk to you, because everybody wants a free bookmark.
That's all. That's great advice. So, if if you're coming back as a user who've watched the how to get your indie books into Barnes and Noble bookstores, which I'll drop in the chat for you guys, that's something that they recommended too. Is, you know, wearing something, being your author brand in a way that people recognize. So that's over in comments if you're watching on YouTube.
Yeah,
Twitter, you're gonna
I
have to
actually, I don't really think getting onto shelves there is helpful, honestly, because, you know, unless people are looking for you, you're just going to get lost in there. I am on shelves in a bunch of indie stores and one or two of the Barnes and Nobles, but it's the signings. That's where you're going to sell the books. At the last one, admittedly, it was during the Christmas season. We moved 70 books, and
Wow.
that's incredible. I didn't even think it was possible to move that many. There was not one moment in the hour. I think it was there from 11 until 8, and I wasn't selling a book. It was pretty cool.
Wow. Wow. Oh, we got a question. Who is your favorite character to write?
I think it probably was Dantes. So Dantes was a character in the Child of Chaos. He was a supporting character, and everybody just loved him. He was kind of an action hero, and he kind of could do anything, but everybody came back and told me he was the favorite character. And so that's why I decided to write Game of War about him. That's his origin story. And so figuring out who he was, why he was doing the things he did, and the kind of adventures. It's like, what do you do with Superman? You beat him up a lot because he's so invulnerable. It's like, well, you have to figure out, you know, what makes him tick and how is he vulnerable. And Dantes gets beat up a lot, but he overcomes, and it's a story that, you know, people really love reading.
So there you go, Luna. You got a new main character to go. Side character, but new character to follow.
It's kind of funny because someone wrote a review of my last book, The House of Prophecy, and he is in that book, and he is kind of a main character, but he's not the main character. And at the end of the review, he goes, and by the way, Dantes is such a badass. So, you know, people are still following him. They just love him, even if he's not the main character. They want to read more about Dantes. And actually, what I'm thinking about is, after I'm done with my finale, which is The Realm of Gods, I'm thinking about going back and giving Dantes 2 more books and making his own trilogy.
Nice. So if you want to follow Glen, besides checking out Glen's books and Glen's signings and everything, the link he mentioned earlier is in the description box. If you're on YouTube, you can find Glen on social if you're not watching on YouTube. But this has been amazing. Just getting
it's a lot of fun. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm glad to come back whenever for whatever. I enjoy talking about this stuff.
Awesome. And thank you so much. It's so great to get to actually meet you over live. Really, really thank you. And everybody who is watching, if you're watching the replay and didn't get to leave your questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, because I can send those comments to Glen from the replay as well, either from Twitter or from YouTube. But thank you all so much for joining. We have another live interview tomorrow. We are doing live interviews or live reads almost every day now through the end of February. So you can subscribe to the channel if you'd like a notification for the next one. Thank you so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye, everybody.